Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Perry Stave. I'm the curator at the National Gallery of Iceland, and we're here today to talk to Christian Marclay, the artist who opened the work The Clock at Listasafni Íslands last night. It was our first 24-hour showing of the video. And at midnight, the house was full of people, and with a lot of young people too. So yeah, thank you all for coming. And if you put enough pressure on the museum, we'll offer another 24-hour viewing. So, but anyway, Christian Marclay is our guest here in Iceland. He was born in 1955, just outside of San Francisco. So he's from California, the land of movie making. And as a child, he grew up in Geneva, actually child until he went to college, in Geneva, the land of clock making. So maybe it was his destiny to be working with film and clocks and time, or the subject of time. He and I met in 1994, just in half a lifetime ago, for an exhibition that was at a gallery in Times Square that I was director of. It was called the Music Box Project. And 17 contemporary artists were commissioned to make music boxes at a Swiss music box maker called Reusch. And John Cale, John Cage, Laurie Anderson, Christian was one of them. And we happen to have in the collection of the National Gallery a music box that was made in 2005. And so I will play a little bit of it for you as a way to segue into our conversation.
Yeah. Use your gloves, important. It's in the...
So this is called tinsel.
Yeah, it's... The batteries are dead, I think. Okay. Yeah, it's called tinsel, but I mean maybe you should show what's on the front of the box.
It says silent, and then on the interior of the box, the letters are scrambled, and it says listen. And so I have wound it up, and we'll give it a listen.
Yeah, so it's 3 anagrams for, well, the title is Tinsel, and this was made for a collector in New York who at the time used to commission artists. Would commission artists to make a Christmas gift that he would send to all his friends and associates. Norton is his name, and Peter Norton, and he invented software very early on. You remember Dr. Norton? That was like that. So anyway, he sold the company and made a lot of money, and put it back into the arts where, you know, he was very a big collector. Anyway, I had worked with Perry on this project of music boxes, and so I had a contact at this factory in Switzerland where they still make music boxes. So thank you. It's the last company in Switzerland that makes mechanical music boxes.
Yeah, and I thought it would be a good segue to talking about your early career in music. You came to New York in 1978, is it, to attend Cooper Union, and that's when you kind of fell into the punk scene, this very iconoclastic and satirical scene, and you became known as a turntablist. Can you say a little bit about those years and your performances as a musician and your composing?
Yeah, so at the time when I was in New York, I was on this exchange program at Cooper Union. I was studying in Massachusetts, in Boston, at the Massachusetts College of Art, and I would go often to New York on the weekends. And then I realized that there was this exchange program with this art school called Cooper Union, and I thought it would be good for me to apply. And I applied, and I was the only student who applied, so I got it. And I spent a semester at Cooper Union, that was the deal, but then I ended up staying the whole year. And I went out almost every night to listen to a lot of bands, punk, but noise bands. No Wave at the time it was called, and a lot of performance art, of course, a lot of galleries, a lot of museums. It was just so much to see and absorb. And my parents wanted me to go back to school and finish my diploma in Boston. So I went back, but as my last project in school, I curated a festival and invited all these musicians, dancers, filmmakers that I had discovered to Boston. And then I finished my Bachelor's of Fine Arts, and during that last year, I also started a band called the Bachelor's Even, and because I didn't play any records, any instruments, I started using records, found sounds that I would manipulate. First, actually, I recorded them on cassettes and used them, these skipping records, as rhythm loops. And me and my colleague from school, we started this duo, and I would use the cassettes as our percussionist in a way. But then I thought, oh, why not bring the turntables on stage and work directly with the sound, show people how I obtained these sounds. And I was even singing at the time. I don't know how to sing, write music, or compose in a traditional way, but it was the punk era, and that allowed me to be creative without having studied music. It was very liberating for me to be able to make sound without having studied sound.
So Bachelor's Even is a reference to the large glass, Duchamp's large glass, and then leads to thoughts about the ready-made. Is there some connection between your reference to Duchamp and his use of ready-made materials and your use of found sound?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I called the band The Bachelor's Even. And for me, the ready-made, the found, I always work with found objects, found sounds, found footage, found everything. For me, the ready-made is there. So why avoid to using it? I mean, for me, what's important is to work with objects, with things that are part of our daily life, and often things that people ignore or don't pay much attention to. Duchamp is definitely a reference. And I remember also when I was a student going to a show of Joseph Beuys at the Guggenheim Museum.
I remember that show. It was one of the great shows of all time at the Guggenheim.
Yeah, that had a strong influence on me. And this idea of, social sculpture, or that anybody could be an artist. And I must say, when I went back to Boston, I invited also people to talk about performance art, and because for me the subject of this festival I had organized was the relationship between performance art and punk. I, for instance, thought that Vito Conci was very much in the spirit of punk rock, and I would see him at rock concerts at the time. He was going out to listen to bands, and I invited him to come and talk about his practice, and that was one of the biggest disappointments of my life. After an exchange of letters, because in those days you wrote letters, he declined at the last minute with some stupid excuse, but so that was sad. But anyway, I saw in a lot of people's practice in film, in dance, Cara Armitage and Reese Shadham, for instance, were doing dance that was very influenced by punk rock. So it was really about bringing to my school that experience, that year in New York, where it was amazing. So the Joseph Beuys was one of those shows that I remembered vividly. Yeah.
So fast forward to 1995, you started appropriating film in your work, and one of those works that you created was Telephones in 1995, a 7.5-minute film about people calling each other, conversations, but disjointed and fractured, and you can say a little bit more about that as a precursor to The Clock.
Yeah, so, I was used to mixing records on multiple turntables, so I was never a dance DJ. I would, use the records to really utilize all the sounds that were generated with a record. So a scratch on a record was as important as the sound recorded in the groove. But I was used to mixing sounds, and I thought, well, I'd love to be able to mix images, or moving images, in the same way. At the time, they had these video discs, which was a media that didn't last very long. And I thought I could maybe, it was like a CD, before CDs, but it had video and sound on it. But it made me think, how can I mix moving image the way I'm mixing records? And so then the technology was complicated because we didn't have computers at home and software that allowed us to do home editing. The first computerized editing system, called Avid, was extremely expensive, but I applied for a grant at the Wexner Art Center and went there for 3 days and worked with an engineer that allowed me to mix these phone conversations. So if you think of a phone conversation, it's a very simple shot. It's like still camera. Someone is speaking on the phone, and then it's a jump cut to the other person who could be anywhere in the world, and suddenly you're in their space, and then it cuts back and forth. These two shots were maybe shot at a different time, and they were put together in the editing suite. So I thought, well, if you can jump in space, maybe you can jump in time also. So one conversation would be from a film, an early black and white film, and that person would be talking to someone in the 80s. All these films were from video cassette, VHS, so the quality wasn't as good as what you saw in The Clock, but it was very much about that time. There were shops where you could rent these videos. So I put together this little piece, and it's this kind of absurd conversation between people in different films talking to each other. And you might notice in The Clock that I've used that trick a few times, that editing, the jump cut, as a transitional way to go to another film. I mean, we're so accustomed to this kind of language of cinema that we accept that. We accept that you can be 1 second in Reykjavik and the next second you're in LA. And we accept that. It's not unusual for us. So, I play a lot with that in the way I edit all this found footage.
So 5 years later, you debuted The Clock at White Cube in London, and then the following year in 2011, you showed it at the Venice Biennale, and it won the Golden Lion. What led to your initiating The Clock?
Well, I had just moved to London from New York, and I didn't have a studio. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had to get used to this new city, and I've had this idea for The Clock a few years before, when I was editing what I call a video score, which is my way of composing music sometimes, providing a graphic score to musicians. And this was in the form of a video projection. So the audience could see what the musicians saw, and they reacted to the image. And I wanted to have moments where they all, on a downbeat, exactly at the same time did something. And I use clock to mark time, the way often contemporary musicians will use like a stopwatch. So I had an assistant at the time, and I wanted to make this video using this archive from San Francisco called the Prelinger Archive, which is an archive of found footage that have no copyright associated with them. Weird instructional films, educational films, or weird advertisement that had lost their copyright, and it was all black and white. And I asked my assistant, I said, well, look for see if they have some clocks in that archive, if you can find a few. And he found like, half a dozen of them. And I thought, wow, what if I could find every minute of a day? At first I thought, well, or at least an hour or something, I could make something with that. And then I thought, oh my God, it would take too long. And I just, I never started and procrastinated. And then, so when I moved to London, suddenly I had a project in mind and I could focus on it.
You had some time.
And I had time, yeah. I didn't have, I found the time. I started, the first year was very speculative. I didn't know if this was even possible, but
thought, let's try it. And the more I did it, the more confident I became. And my wonderful gallery in London, White Cube, supported me for 3 years while I was working on this project. And I think it was, I just worked with one assistant for a long time, and then I hired more people to look at films. So my role was editing, and every day they would bring me stuff to work on. And then I had, two computers, one for the 12 a.m. hours and one for the p.m. hours. And, you start assembling these fragments, and eventually you find ways to make them work. Yeah, it's all about editing, and it's the magic of cinema that's made out of fragments anyways, but it's just using fragments from different sources.
So it took 3 years to make, and altogether you had 6 assistants working with you, or how did you source the material? How did you find what could be made available to you? What were the mechanics of that? What was the process?
It was just renting videos at video stores. They don't exist anymore.
So it was easier then than it might be now?
Today would be impossible, I think.
Yeah.
You could upload films, but the quality wouldn't be so good. So in a weird way, it is a time capsule of, my time in London in a weird way, because, there's a lot of Big Ben, because there were a lot of British films, and they usually kind of put that iconic clock in there. But today it would be difficult, but maybe it would be easier and faster to source the material using AI. Finding stuff, doing research would be a lot easier. But I would assign to different assistants different genre of films, or different types of films, so they didn't all look at the same material. They had a fun job. It was on and off, an average of 6 assistants. By the end, then there was a deadline, because White Cube wanted me to finish this damn thing, and and then they wanted me to open it during Freeze Fair. And so, then I worked really, nonstop, and very unhealthy.
One of the students who saw the video yesterday asked me to ask you, was it dictated by what was available in these stores, and therefore no Bollywood, no world cinema? Was it mostly the Western canon that you had to work with because of the circumstances?
I would have taken anything. I was so desperate. Bollywood was interesting because, in London, because of the colonies, and there's a lot of Indian population, and they have video shops. But Bollywood is always, the narratives are out of time. They're fantasy, You fall in love, and you're transported to the Swiss Alps, actually. There's never any clocks, who cares about clocks? There are a few in the end. I found a few, but not as much as I wanted. A lot of African films usually were on VHS. Made it more difficult, but it was hard to find world cinema in your kind of traditional video rental shop. So it's not for lack of wanting to. For me, it's important to have as much diversity as possible, and because the whole world is obsessed with time, not just us. It might be different, like you guys experience time differently. The light here might keep you up like it did last night. And time is expressed differently, but we all have the same anxiety about time.
A practical question: did you have to seek copyright approvals to rip all of these clips?
No, I've never sought copyright approval for any of my work. In the music, I always used appropriated music. I strongly believe that if you do something creative that people think is interesting, they're not going to go after you, and especially not the big Hollywood film the industry. I'm too small of a fish to catch, and in the end, it turns out that it is very much an ode to cinema, and I was afraid people in the end are going to sue me for not including them. I mean, that's, copyright is difficult, but right now, especially in North America, where there is, where you can appropriate, fair use is the law, and it varies differently from country to country. Right now, people are a bit paranoid in the U.S. about copyright. There was recently a case around Warhol appropriating an image of Prince and losing the case. So people are really worried. I don't know. I mean, it seems so contradictory to the way we live. Everything is on the net. We have access to everything. I see my work like being reproduced online, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I don't know. I don't think. Yeah, maybe the notion of copyright is a bit obsolete, I respect artists and their right to protect their creations, but cinema is on. It's a very, it's a big industry. It's very commercial, and there's art in it, but it's a blurry division.
So at noon, 12 noon, and at midnight, there's an awful lot going on in cinema because these are the top of the hour times. How did you select from what I'm imagining was a great deal of possibility? And then, on the other hand, what were the hardest times of the day to find film clips for?
Midnight and noon were easier, but I would say the hardest was between 3 and 5 a.m. So in narratives, it's rare that people, things happen during those hours. Oh, you went during those hours last night. I'm curious to hear what you have to say, but yeah, I mean, there's plenty happening, you know, until 2 a.m. People are trying to sleep. Other people are trying to murder people that are sleeping, or breaking a bank, or, you know, like, there's a lot of crime happening late at night when the other half is sleeping. But at 5 o'clock, everything starts again, you know. Life picks up. People go to work. They wake up. A lot of alarm clocks. But before you wake up, apparently that's when you have the most dreams. And so I use a lot of dream scenes in cinema, which there's some great stuff. Where there's, you know, it can go quite psychedelic, or there's a lot of overlaps, and they're not the hard cuts of normal hours, in a way. So, yeah, that was difficult, but the dreams allowed me to kind of stretch time a little bit and fill those holes. But at night, what's interesting to me is that, maybe I should say that it's not an endurance piece. So I don't recommend anybody to spend the whole day in there. It's like, especially on a day like today, you want to be out in the sun. But you know, you go back to it when you have time, and you sync it with your own life when you have time to spend in a movie theater. But it's a very different experience than when you go and see a film, because in a cinema, the architecture is designed for everybody coming in at the same time and leaving at the same time. And I wanted to create an environment where you can leave anytime without disturbing a whole row, and arrive anytime when, you know, without disturbing. So it's a comfortable experience for everybody, because you decide when to come in and you decide when to leave. No one tells you. And every time you choose to go there is the right time. There's no wrong time to go. You have to sync it with your life, you know, with driving the kids to school, or feeding the dogs, or just eating yourself, or going to the bathroom, you know. There's life, but it's happening at the same time. So it is a functioning clock, and your life, and you become a participant, you know, an actor in the film.
It's been 15 years since you first, or almost 15 years since you first debuted The Clock, and the world has changed, especially technologically, especially with the advent of the iPhone, which doesn't appear in The Clock because it came out later. But I know that before you opened the exhibition at MoMA just a couple of months ago, there was an article, I guess in the New York Times, speculating whether the clock would be relevant to the younger generations who grew up with an iPhone, and not so much with clocks which were almost always, you know, not on perfect time. Or so can you say a little bit about how that has sort of stood the test of time, so to speak, to being relevant to a younger generation of people?
Yeah, I was very curious about that, thinking, you know, because 10 years is a long time. MoMA showed it at the beginning, 10 years ago, and there are a few, you know, flip phones and some digital clocks in the film, but now, I mean, you know, in movies. They still wear watches, you know. James Bond still wears a wristwatch. It's commercial placement, and thank God for James Bond. I got a lot of different watches, but now you would see, you know, tons of iPhones. You know, that's how we tell time. And like you said, in the old days, you could, you know, time was malleable. Everybody had a few minutes difference on their wristwatch. Now we can't say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm late. My watch is slow. Or, you know, we're all in sync, perfectly in sync. So that's also an interesting change, you know. That, but I think, I mean, I've heard from young people that it is still relevant for them, even though they might not be familiar with all the actors, they might not have seen these films, but in a way that's kind of good because you don't get distracted by memory. You're just engaged in what is happening on the screen without the distraction of wanting to recognize the film and thinking, oh, did I see that? Yeah, what was that? Who's that actor? I know him. You know, that kind of mental activity.
And maybe the fact that it jumps from scene to scene lends itself well to the attention span of people who are looking at TikTok and Instagram and, you know, social media.
Maybe, but in a way, I mean, young people also spend a lot of time in there, so it does grab their attention. Yeah, I mean, that would be an interesting kind of thing to do. We were just talking earlier about an article in the Brooklyn Rail, which is a newspaper in New York, where they commissioned 24 writers to write about one of the hours, and a great variety of people, from scientists to tennis players and art historians. They should do the same thing with like under 20 to see, you know, find out what they think about it. Yeah.
In a way, when you're looking at the clock, it almost becomes a sort of, I don't know, anthropological, because certain activities take place across, you know, all cultures. This take place in the morning. People get up, they have their coffee, or they head off to work, or they head off to school. But that's indexed to, you know, sort of a kind of day that starts with the light coming up in the morning and kind of ending at the end of the day. And you've remarked, as you alluded to earlier, about how it's a little bit different here in Iceland, where the light kind of slips in longer days in the summer and shorter. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the first time I'm experiencing this, and you're going to show the clock for 24 hours during the summer solstice. So, yeah, that's kind of an interesting experience. I mean, you're in the dark room, so you don't know how different the light is outside. But it must be strange, you know, when you walk out. That disjunction between a more kind of international time and that geographical uniqueness of Iceland. Yeah, I mean, it creates a nice tension. The hardest thing, in a way, for me, when I was editing, sometimes if the scenes were outdoors, was to match the light. Because, you know, I have to find these connections, and I have to create a flow, and this continuity relies on all kinds of things. I mean, it can be a jump cut. It's fine to jump on a phone conversation from sunny LA to dark New York, but within the narrative, if the people are supposed to be in the same kind of environment, the light was difficult to match. Sometimes I could not use certain scenes because of the lighting conditions. So, then it becomes interesting when, I don't know, I mean, I won't be here, but you'll tell me about it, how people experience it. But also, it's easier to go at 3 a.m. When it's daylight than on a cold winter night in, Germany. It takes more courage.
So in the clock, time is sort of the master, or it's certainly the protagonist in the stream, and human activity just kind of comes and goes, and then you start to become more aware of, the span of a human life, or vanitas, the memento mori. Can you say a little bit about that? The fact that time for humans is finite.
I mean, it's a strange experience because I want you to be aware of the time passing, yet there's enough moments of narratives that kind of pull you in different directions and make you forget about time, but then it comes like constantly you're reminded. And then you realize, oh my God, I've been here for an hour. And usually people also remember when they came in and when they left. But that tension between forgetting about time and being reminded constantly about time is interesting for me. And it's a moment of reflection, thinking about how, from 1 minute to the next, the whole world can, something can change your life completely. It only takes a second. And, it shows us as being vulnerable, and it is a memento mori. I mean, I've always been interested in representation of time in art, and not just clocks, like how, a candle burning or, something expressing time. In cinema, one of the strongest symbol for time is a cigarette, especially in early cinema. Now you can't show people smoking, but in a lot of situation, people avoid the cigarette. But the cigarette is like, a 20th century candle. So it's not like in a vanitas painting or a rotting fruit or. But every day the clock is the same. So if you go back, I tend to see always the same times when I'm setting up, because it's from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. when we're working. I mean, now someone developed for me a software I can jump around, so it helps for EQing the sound to go to midnight, which is a strong kind of sonic moment, and other hours. So I'm able to jump around in the computer to find these times. But otherwise it plays automatically on a loop, and it's every day. It's the same, but everybody experiences it differently. It's a different experience, for each of us.
I'm looking at my watch and being mindful of time, and I'll so just ask you two more questions, if I may. When one listens to the soundtrack of the clock, sometimes it seems like the sound is coming from the film and the action in the film, but other times there seems to be some other sound, I'm assuming composed by you, or maybe composed from fragments of films by you, that sort of cross or sort of span various clips. Can you say a little bit about how you approached it from the soundtrack aspect?
Yeah, the sound is very important very often to bridge these different clips, and so I might use a soundtrack and that will bleed into the next, or like for noon, I mean, I use the high noon composition throughout, with other images, and kind of use that momentum. But yeah, in the initial editing, I got the flow, editing the image, and then did a rough mix of the sound. But then I went into post-production and worked only on the sound. And I've never created music for it. It's always from those films. So it might be from an excerpt that came just before or after, or a mixture of both. Yeah, that was also a very pleasurable process, because that really is kind of the finishing touch, and it helps. You might have a weak visual transition, but if it has a strong sonic transition, it will be more believable. So the sound plays a very important role, and that, of course, came out of my practice as a DJ and editing sound and being familiar with what you can do. And it's not just the music; it's the Foley sound effects. Sometimes I had to redo the Foley, or if an excerpt was with a voiceover, a voiceover in cinema is usually someone reminiscing. So, they describe what happened, and you see them at a different time of their life. So everything had to be in the present time tense. So I had to redo some sound effects, from footsteps to different clicks, once I had to record just someone shaving, and I had to go and buy a shaving can. So it took a long time. I work with a sound designer that does a lot of cinema in New York, and he has like an endless library of sound effects. When we weren't able to use something pre-recorded, I had to do it. Yeah.
I've always wanted to ask you, when you were making the clock, did you know you were onto something great?
I knew it would be a successful piece if I pulled it off, but I didn't expect I didn't expect I'd be here talking about it 10 years later. It became a big thing, and a bit of an albatross, a bit of a burden, because it eclipsed a lot of my other work, and I do so many things, from music to sculpture and photography and even paintings, collages. But actually collage is really at the center of all my practice. So, working with the found material, putting it together, creating new meaning out of juxtapositions. Yeah, I'm a true believer in the ready-made, so we're back at the beginning.
One last question. So you arrived on last Sunday, and you've been here almost a week. What are your impressions of Iceland and Icelanders, and will you come back?
Yeah, I mean, the light has been the most difficult to adjust, but very beautiful. I mean, last night, it was just before midnight, and the sky was blue, but it was, you know, dark blue. It was like amazing. Like, I suppose it's what we call the blue hour. You know, just that tension between light, daylight, and night. But it's such a slow progression. So the sun takes forever to go down, if it ever does. And I had the chance to go to the national park one afternoon on May 1st. Nobody.
Think they live.
Yeah, in the spring. So that was really nice. Yeah, I'll come back.
And on that note, thank you, Christian.
Thank you.